So here's the question, to bring us to another revelation. What about the trees? What about the trees? The trees, they also have a cycle in a year. When do the trees of Israel blossom? Because if God set up this pattern, this mystery, that he's revealing the age to the Hebrew year, is there something in there about trees? And yes, there is. Let's see what happens. In the sacred year, here's the question, first question. When does the fig tree blossom? The answer is very interesting. Though it can sometimes produce figs in winter, but they're called untimely rotten figs, that's not its real harvest. The time that it produces, the fig tree has a specific harvest. And it has two. The first harvest is called the harvest of the Bikora or the Bikorim. Say it, Bikorim. You should know it. That's the harvest of the first figs. You've read it in the Bible as either the early figs or the first figs, the first fruits of their... When does it happen? It starts forming in the springtime, and it becomes ripe in late spring, early summer, as in May or June right now. Now let's bring it together with the other mystery, the one of the Hebrew year, and what do we get? The springtime is linked to Messiah's first coming, Passover, Pentecost, all springtime. In other words, there will be, in Messiah's first coming, there will be a blossoming of Israel to a degree. You have the triumphant entry, you have Passover, you have the crucifixion, you have resurrection. While that was all happening, something was happening in nature. The Bikora, or the first fruits, were being formed on the fig trees. Think of the disciples. They are the fruit of Israel. They are the first fruits of this age. And they were being formed in that time. But then the time on the fig trees, the time comes where the first fruits of the fig tree, the early figs, they actually come to fruition and comes the harvest. They blossom. When? Listen when it is. It's the time of Pentecost. It's the time of Shavuot. May, June, right now. So in other words, put this together. As the figs are beginning to be put forth, the first figs of Israel, as they're coming to fruition, the believers are gathered together as the first fruits of the age, and the Spirit's coming upon them. As the Spirit's coming upon them, in nature, all around Israel, it's saying the first fruits are ready. The fig tree is putting forth its first figs. You understand? It's paralleling what happened at the same time. The first believers are the first fruits. Pentecost is called the feast of what? First fruits. And so there they are on the day of the Spirit. And then what happens is the fig harvest, that first harvest, continues on a little bit. And that time after Pentecost, so you have the book of Acts. And you have the first blossoming of the first fruits of Israel. You have Jerusalem blossoming. You have the gospel blossoming. It's the same, and all around them in nature, in the same time, you have the fig tree bringing forth its first fruits. The first evangelists, they're the figs. They're the first figs. They're Jewish believers, messengers, teachers, all coming from the tree of Israel. Tree of Israel is actually bearing some fruit. And Paul, when he speaks of the first believers in Acts, he speaks of them as being the first fruits. And in Romans 11, he said, if the first fruits are holy, then the whole thing is holy. The first fruits are the apostles, and the believers. They are the Bikorim. The fig tree of Israel puts it forth. And it's a fascinating thing here. Because what is he saying, Paul? Maybe you probably read it 1,000 times, have not caught it. He says, if the first fruits are holy, the whole thing is holy. The roots, the whole branch is holy. What's he saying? He's saying, if the first fruits of Israel were holy, the apostles, first believers, then the whole tree is holy. Then the Jewish people, there's something about them. Now, every Jewish person, just like Jew and Gentile, are equal in the Lord, and they need to get saved the same way. But think about what he's saying. Think about the principle of first fruits. When you give a tithe, or that's representing everything in your life. The first fruits stand for everything else. So it's a fascinating thing that is being said here by Paul. That he's saying, listen, and this is, I've never heard this before, and I think Jewish people would, many of them who don't know the Lord would panic at hearing this. But this is what he's saying. He's saying that the entire nation of Israel is sanctified by the apostles and disciples. Not that they're saved yet, but what it's saying is that Israel did bear fruit, but it came through the first believers. Through that, let me give you an example. Israel was called to be a light to the nations, right? A light to the Gentiles. Was it? Oh, yes, through the disciples. But no other way, really. In other words, so through the disciples, they fulfilled the mission of Israel. So Israel is blessed because of the disciples. Israel was called to spread the word of God to the ends of the earth. Did it? Only through the disciples. And yet through the disciples, the entire word of God, the word of Israel, has gone to the ends of the earth. The whole mission of a nation was fulfilled by those first believers in the Lord. So the first fruits sanctifies the whole nation. The entire world knows, or so many in every nation know, the Psalms of Israel, the prophets, the writings, all that, the songs of Israel, because of the first fruits, because of just that collection of people. Amazing. So those few people, those first fruits, have fulfilled the entire mission of a nation. Now it's not finished, it's in part when the day comes, but amazing. And actually it's come back, the blessings have come back to Israel, because Israel, the nation of Israel, has been blessed by believers from all around the world. They've been blessed by believers who have prayed for them, stand with them, give to them, visit them, support them. Why? Through those first believers. Through the name of Yeshua, Jesus, and that's the only name. And through the disciples, you understand? So Israel has been, in fact, you could argue, Israel might not have even, of course it was God who was going to do it, but he used believers actually to help Israel come back into the world. It's all Jesus blessing his people and the first fruits, the result of these messianic believers, Paul, Peter, all that, and that Israel is blessed to this day. And the Spirit of God comes on the day that's called the day of the Bikor, the feast of the Bikurim, the first fruits. They are the first fruits. So what happens now? Let's bring it forward. What happens on the Hebrew year?